Welcome everybody joining us on this last session of our course on the history of Zionism. I hope it is live streaming. Melissa, please just give me a thumbs up to make sure it is. And we're going to get started. It's the last session, so I've crammed. So we stopped at 1949 and this is 2024. So I've crammed everything into tonight. All the rest of the history of Israel in one night. So good luck. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to get to that, but this is going to be a kind of a way to close our time together and maybe address some of the issues that we are seeing right now. This is the spring of 2024, and I think a lot of people who have come to this course have come to find maybe some answers to what's happening on our streets, on our university campuses, what's happening in Israel and Gaza. So hopefully I'll be able to, in a way, to recap, also to point out some of those challenges that we are faced with, and see where it goes. So we'll start with our Shalom chant. I invite you to sit back, maybe close your eyes if you want, and just to take a few mindful breaths. And to transition from whatever the day has brought you to being here, to being with us. To being here and now. I invite you to take a breath for Shalom. יהיו לרצון עם רפי ויגיון ליבי לפניך, אדוני. Holy One of Being, help us to know your presence between us through space, through time. Help us to know your peace, your vitality, your presence in our hearts, in our minds, in our soul. That the words of our mouth and the meditations of our hearts might always, always flow from the center of your being. Flow from the compassionate heart of your being. Adonai Tzuri v'Go'ali, Holy One, help us to remember that you are source and your destination. Amen. So I thought that to get us started, we would have what do you call those? I don't remember. We would have a pop quiz. See, I told you there was going to be a test at the end of the class. So I thought we should start with a pop quiz and see how you do. See how you do. If you are ready after this course to re-enter the world with the knowledge you need to speak truth to falsehood. And I was influenced by wanting to do that because this came up actually a few weeks ago as part of our B'nai Mitzvah program. And some kids brought up a map. that I guess is widely circulating on the interwebs to the point where even 12-year-olds are seeing this map and are concerned about it, or are being pushed to understand something that might not be, in fact, reality. And so there was a beautiful conversation that happened as part of the Bnei Mitzvah program, talking about the map, and so I thought, my sense is if that map has reached 12-year-olds, is that many of us have also seen it, and maybe it would be a good thing for us to take a look at it. So this is why I think it will be a good test for you. So I'm going to show you the map, and I'm going to invite you to take a few moments to look at it. Where did it go? Where did it go? Map, map, map. Let's try that again. No, it's right here. Okay. So let's do share screen. I'll find it. Hang on, bear with me here. There you are. You were just hidden over there. All right, here is the map. So take a look at it. Take your time. I want you to sit with it for a second or two. We're going to have it in front of us. And maybe you've seen this map already. I don't know. It is clearly circulating all over the internet. So just take a quick look at it, and we're going to start talking about it. I hope it is big enough for everybody to see. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger for some of us. There. Good. Okay. So let's start, it goes from left to right. And let's start with the first map. So again, this is a map that is circulating all over the internet that clearly is a map of propaganda. And we need to, if we have really learned something during this course, maybe each of us be able to take this and kind of discuss it. So that first map, the one on the left, is got a few things on it, obviously. And since it's 1947 at the bottom, we can assume that this is, based on the second map, which is Partition Plan 1947. So we can assume that this is the map pre-Partition Plan, the map of, what seems to be Palestine. It says on it, Palestine, pre-UN Partition Plan, right? Now, there's a lot of challenging assumptions in this map. A lot of challenging assumptions. The first one is that it's a map. And maps are very challenging because we assign them a lot of authority. We see a map and we believe that it is a scholarly map. We believe that it's been created by people who know what they're talking about, that went out of their way to make maps. I mean, there is something in our psyche that leads us to believe maps. Maybe we believe maps over speech sometimes. Now we look at a map and we're kind of convinced of truth, and then we say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So maybe that's also why. The second issue is that if this is a map of Palestine in 1947, then it should not say just Palestine. It should say British Mandate Palestine. There should be a couple more words there, right? It should say British Mandate Palestine, and that would be a more accurate description of this map, not just Palestine. And the Palestine, it's written in the green part, and you see in the legend up on top that there is Jewish settlements that should be in white and Palestinian land. So there are many challenging. I mean, just the fact that it only says Palestine in the green part is misleading at best. I would even go as far as to say that it's a lie at worst, at least a biased untruth, let's call it that. And secondly, if this is a map of areas of settlement in British Mandate Palestine, then it should show not just Jewish settlements, but also Arab towns and settlements and cities just equally. In which case, and assuming that the green color is supposed to represent Arab settlements, as it says in the legend, Palestinian land, right? So assuming that's all of the green is Arab settlement, then it should show actually areas of Arab settlement that should probably look closer to the second map, the map of the partition, because we know that the partition was actually based, the lines were drawn on the map based on where most Arabs of Palestine lived versus Jews of Palestine lived. So if we were to accurately reflect settlements, then the map should not actually be completely green. Actually, it should be probably should have the Union Jack flag in the background, and then you should have two colors for Jewish settlement and an Arab settlement that would show, where everybody actually lived, because we absolutely know that the Negev desert was not inhabited. So, there wouldn't be any Arab settlements there, or towns or cities south of Beersheba for sure. So it's very much misleading. It's very much misleading. And obviously we should also see that in the dominantly white areas, there are also some green, but also in the green areas, there were also some white as well. And just like the white area in the first map, is intertwined with some green, then we should also see some areas intertwined with some white in the green part. Lastly, if we were to be very precise, even in the area defined by the UN partition plan, we would show that these areas were also mostly empty and sparse of settlement, right? I mean, the UN partition plan drew a big line around Palestinian Arabs of Palestine places of residence. So, for example, in what we call to the West Bank, right, the Arab settlements of the West Bank, if we were to do an accurate representation of where they were in the first map, it would pretty much look like the last map, the one on the complete on the right side. Right? That would probably, the Arab settlements on the West Bank would probably look like that, and not just a whole green overall painting of the map altogether, because again, there is a lot of unsettled, uninhabited parts of the land, and especially in the West Bank as well, as you can see from the last map. And that's, the map that has a much higher density of Arab population at this point in history than were in 1947. So one would assume that, the Arab settlement in the West Bank, if you were to superimpose the West Bank on the 1947 map on the left, would look pretty much like the present map on the right. Right. So that would be a little bit more accurate. So there is exact bias in this map for sure. And the legend on the map should also have not just Jewish settlement, but Arab settlements, right? Arab settlements instead of Palestinian land. That land was not Palestinian. It was part of the British Mandate. He wasn't Palestinian. Um, Palestinian as a nation didn't have that name. In Palestine, there were Palestinian Jews, Palestinian Arabs, and Palestinian Christians. There were Palestinian Druze. There were Samaritans. There were Bedouins. So it's also very much misleading to assign the word Palestinian to that first map. It could be Arab settlement, just like there are Jewish settlement, because it also erases all the other people who lived there. And anyone who lived in British Palestine, like I just said, was Palestinian. And in general, it's also, if you remember from the class, from the previous sessions, anyone's identity at the time was much more religious or tribal, familial. Families were important, like the Nashashibis, the Husseinis, right? People defined themselves based on those tribal and family connections. And at the time, the word Palestine was really associated with the British Christian naming of the land, if you remember. And so it was a reflection, the word Palestine was a reflection of British sovereignty over the land. And, it would be, people of the land would be very reluctant at the time to call themselves Palestinian, because that would reflect on the British colonizing of the land instead of their own personal identity. And the term Palestinian, as we understand it today, as we know it today, that is given to exclusively the Arab people of the land. That term is only coined and adopted by the Arab population in the 1960s. And you can't, therefore, truthfully use it for a pseudo 1947 map that obviously is falsely titled, as you see at the top, Palestinian Loss of Land, 1947 to the present. And finally, I think, there's a lot more to say about this, but finally, I'm really saddened by the use of such terminology in the title itself, right? I understand the reasoning, but the way that it's worded speaks to the current and past Palestinian view of the issue, that absolutely any settlement is de facto a loss of land, right? I think it really shows, even in the first map, the point of view, the worldview, that the Palestinian land was to be the whole map, and that already in 1947, Palestine had lost land because of Jewish settlement. So in the Palestinian mind, because I believe that this is from Palestinian leadership propaganda, there should really never have been any white collar on this map to begin with, because all of this is showing, according to Palestinian propaganda, the erasing of and the loss of land of the Palestinian people. And so what this does is that in the Palestinian mind, we already begin as a zero-sum game. Like, no Jewish presence can be tolerated. The entire map needs to be completely green. There shouldn't be, and never should have been, any Jews there. And so the sad part to me is that it's an anti-Israel propaganda map that is used online today, clearly because the kids of the Bnei Mitzvah program brought it. And not in 1948 at the peak of the first war that we debated, that I shared last session. And so Palestinian Arab still see reality, it seems, from this map, and wants the world to see reality in this way, that all of the history of Palestine is a history of loss, and that any Jewish settlement has meant a loss for them. However many war there have been to turn this map completely green, including the current one, by the way. How many defeats has there been? But it's still like the entire Palestinian nation, or at least their leadership, has kept mourning. It's like the Palestinian people, and especially their leadership, has been stuck in this mourning process for 100 years, right? And maybe the different stages of the mourning process, right? It feels to me that they're still mourning the presence of even one Jewish settlement in the land. They're mourning that they still haven't been able to move through the different stages. They're still, it seems, stuck both in denial and in anger. And I'm looking at this map and I'm thinking to myself, maybe one of the solutions, I don't know, I don't have a magic wand for solutions, but it seems one of the solutions might very well be to support a national shift in the Palestinian ethos toward acceptance, because this is still a map of grievances. This is still a map of denial, and it's still a map of great anger. And to me, as long as maps like these are circulated and paraded as truth, it will only keep the Palestinian people stuck in a cycle of violence, still fighting last century's war. So a lot of issues with that first map. Let's go to the second map, not just the first map, but also obviously the legend and the title of the map itself. Again, to me, that's what really saddens me. Anyways, so the second map. So again, this is supposed to show the progression of the Palestinian loss of land over the years, right? So the second map is, of all the maps, paradoxically the most almost accurate. This is the partition plan of 1947. Except for the legend again, because those who drew this partition plan didn't know in November 1947 that the designated Jewish area would be called Israel, right? In November 1947, those who drew this map at the UN didn't know that the white part will be called Israel, because that only happens in May of 1948. Or they didn't know that the Arab designated area would be called Palestine, as it says here on the map. They had no idea of that. Again, that name was taken on in the 1960s by the Arab populations of the land. So they didn't know in 1947 what each side of the partition would call themselves at the time. So that's a little bit problematic, but it's understandable. They're trying to make a point here. But this point notwithstanding, there is still something very problematic with this map, and that is that it isn't a map of reality. It simply isn't a map of reality. It's a map of an illusion. Why? Because it's a map of a aspiration. It's a proposal that in fact never came to be. So it's not a map of anything on the ground. It's a map that was, that was drawn in an office space somewhere at the UN. It's a proposal that in fact never came to be. It's not the map of any land or any state, but it's a picture of something that never became a reality. It's a plan that forever remained theoretical, um, you know, because as I mentioned last time, though Israel declared independence in May of 1948, according to this map, believing that this map was a map of facts on the ground, or they tried to make them facts on the ground in the whole first half, the first 5 months of 1948, as we discussed last session. Um, Israel declared independence in May 1948. Palestine never did. There was never a leadership. The Mufti of Jerusalem, on May 14th, 1948, didn't come together in Jerusalem or wherever and declared the independence of the state of Palestine. So again, this is a map that was a drawing, never a reality. What it turned out to be was a pretext for a war. Really, that's what it turned out to be. It was a pretext for a war to, in fact, prevent this map from ever becoming a reality. Right? It's a war that was waged by 5 Arab nations against the fledgling Jewish nation, together with the Arabs of Palestine inside the borders, to erase and completely destroy the newborn state of Israel. So really, all that map really was ultimately was a fodder for warfare. So it's not a map of any loss of Arab land, as the title would lead us to believe. Because in fact, had the Arabs of Palestine accepted this plan, it would have been, let's call it 100% gain of land from, in fact, never having had a land that belonged to them, right? Had they accepted this map, they would have been able to finally have a land, whatever they would have called it, we don't know. Maybe Palestine, but we don't know at the time if that was going to be the name they would have chosen. But they never did, because, again, they never wanted any white in any map. So they invited the other Arab nations around to erase completely all the white areas of this potential map that should never, in fact, become a reality. And not only did it not work, as we saw last session, but these other Arab nations that came in and invaded took the land that was designated to them by the United Nations and never, ever gave it back. Which leads me to the third map, the map of 1949 to 1967. So the map of 1949 to 1967 is also very misleading, in the sense that this is the map at the end of the war, the first war, the war that Israel calls the War of Independence, the war that Arab called the Nakba, the disaster, the catastrophe. And this is the war from 1949. So from about April was the last armistice of 1949 that was signed, to 1967, and the Six-Day War of June 1967, right? So these, in fact, are the armistice lines of 1949. Now, what's wrong with this map? Well, once again, the words Palestinian in the legend and the word Palestine on the map for the green area or areas are wrong because there never was a Palestine. The West Bank, as we saw last session, was conquered by and belonged to Transjordan, or what becomes eventually Jordan, right? So it shouldn't say Palestine there. It should say Jordan. And the Gaza Strip, which is at the bottom left corner, belonged to Egypt. So it should say Egypt there. And in the 20 years, almost 20 years, 18 years of Jordan and Egypt's occupation of these parts of the land, they never once intended to create an independent Arab state of Palestine or whatever other name they would have called it in either of these territories. Never once. Never once with either Jordan or Egypt. Never did they come together to discuss the possibility of creating an Arab state in the land that they had conquered in the 1948 war. So again, it is very much misleading. What is true in this map is the armistice line of the war and the size of Israel at the end of the War of Independence, all the way through 1967. But if the third map shows at least an accurate representation of Israel, that is not the case with the fourth map, which, for one, ignores Israel capture of the Golan Heights in the northeast corner of the map, and thereby denying that it is part of Israel. So the Six-Day War on June 1967 showed Israel capturing the West Bank from Jordan and Gaza, and actually more than that, from the Egyptians. Right. So when we talk about, when some people called the West Bank as the occupied territories, they may be occupied. If they are occupied, they're occupied from the Jordanians. I mean, we're talking historically now. We can talk philosophically and politically, and we can have debates. But historically, that land was under British mandate. Before that, it was the Ottoman Empire. Then it became Jordanian for almost 20 years. And then the Israeli forces in 1967, in the war that saw, again, the five Arab nations trying to invade Israel, this time in a pre-strike, Israel was able to capture or to claim from Jordan the West Bank, and from Egypt the Gaza Strip. Neither the West Bank nor Gaza, despite Israel having won on the war, have actually never been annexed to Israel. That's important to know. They have never been annexed to Israel. Israel never said these territories now are part of the state of Israel. That never actually happened. Up until right now, until this day, they have remained for the West Bank and for Gaza until 2005 under military rule, pending final status through negotiation, should the Palestinians choose to enter into negotiation with Israel. So Israel has never, contrary to the map, what the map seems to be telling us, um, Israel has never claimed the West Bank, and definitely not Gaza, who was given back to the Palestinians and to, unfortunately, Hamas in after 2005. So these territories are still only military occupation pending peace negotiations with the Palestinians. Notice that the legend also has changed. Now all the white is declared Israeli and occupied land, and it's ambiguous enough that we don't actually exactly know which is Israeli or which is occupied versus Palestinian land. And that, in fact, is the second one, Palestinian land, is more accurate at this point because, like I said, Gaza was, after 2005, given back to Palestinians to rule over, and all the green areas of the West Bank, like we see on this map, are under the Palestinian Authority that has control and rules over these green places. And in some places, Israel keeps security control, especially the border, the territory of the border with Jordan. As you can see, there's a big white band there for security reason, and some parts of the West Bank also, but mostly all those green areas are under security control as well as political and economic control of the Palestinian Authority today. So, just as Israel was able to maintain security with the Jordanian border, it wasn't able to do that with the Gaza Strip and the Egyptian border. So there's been a shared border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt since 2005. So I don't know how you fared through these maps, or if you would be at this point able to have a conversation about these maps. But it's an interesting thing to see, especially these days when this map becomes so prevalent everywhere that we are in fact able to discuss them and be able to really see the truth from the propaganda. Okay. So we're going to stop share and come back here. Hi. So, give yourself a mark. How did you do? Were you able to follow along? And that will be your grade for the what do you call it? For the semester Um, all right. Now, let's continue and look at how we can respond to the range of accusations and slogans that are these days being shouted in the protests all over our countries, in our universities. And we'll use that as a means perhaps to recap our learning for this class. So one of the accusations is that Jews stole the land of the Palestinians, as the maps clearly showed us. That is the process through which the Jews stole the land from the Palestinians. Now, we've seen that as the Jews returned home as refugees, they began buying empty tracts of land, first from the Ottoman Empire, places that were where there was no settlement, no habitation, no farms, and those were the first lands that the Jews bought, and they did that for several decades from the Ottoman Empire. They also eventually started to buy land from local wealthy landowners Ottoman Arabs who willingly sold their land to them. If you remember, I mentioned that, just like in the feudal system in Europe, there were wealthy landowners that had, they called it serfs, who cultivated the land of the wealthy landowners, and sometimes they had cultivated those lands for generations, and then they just paid a tribute or a tax, a percentage to their farming to the landowner. But those had gone on for so many generations that there was a sense that these land, kind of belonged to the serfs, well, where they didn't. So the same thing happened in Palestine, and when the Ottoman landowners, farmers, sold part of their vast estate to the Jews, it happened that when the Jews came to create their farms, the the Arabs that had lived there on the land of the landowner and cultivated that part or grazed their cattle's, um, felt that that land belonged to them and felt that they were expropriated. So there were issues with that as well, for sure. And as more Jews arrived, more land was purchased. Again, more from the Ottoman Empire and the Sultan in Istanbul, but also from Arab families, wealthy families who, in fact, we know historically were delighted to cash in on their property that had become more and more valuable the more Jews came in, and became even wealthier, and often many of them decided to abandon farming, and with the money that they got from selling their land, they were able to have a wealthy lifestyle in the Arab cities and towns around them. And as I said, this influx of Jewish capital, in fact, benefited greatly the Arab economy. So additionally, the notion of stolen land, I would venture to say that it disempowers the Arab population. Because if the land is stolen, then it paints a picture of Arabs that were passive bystanders with no agency, really left at the mercy of the sly and cunning Jewish thief, which is, as we know, a long-held anti-Semitic trope. And we've seen that this never was the case, and that the Arabs, in fact, most violently opposed and fought not only against any Jewish presence in the land, but against also those Arabs who were selling their land to the Jews. And we saw that especially after the collapse of the Muslim Ottoman Empire and through the entire British Mandate. So the accusations obviously continue, not just through the Ottoman Empire and the British Mandate and the growth of the Yishuv, but the accusation of Jews having stolen Palestinian land continue, of course, from the Nakba, from the catastrophe that the war against Israel in 1948 is described by the Arabs of Palestine. Now, we have seen in some places, like Haifa, if you remember from last session, that Arabs in Haifa sought counsel from their leadership, both the Palestinian leadership, but also the leadership of the Arab League, when the Jews who were solidifying their positions in Haifa, where especially the Jewish mayor of Haifa, was enjoining the Arabs to stay, and the Arab population didn't know what to answer the Jewish mayor, so they asked, if you remember from last session, they asked Arab leadership, and the Arab leadership responded to them that there should never be an Arab who lives one day under Jewish rule, which clearly was telling them either to fight, or to flee. And so most of them, overwhelmingly, left. And they left with the promise, in fact, that the war would be won by the Arab forces and that they would return to their position soon enough, and they had nothing to fear. Everything was going to be okay. The Jews were going to be pushed into the sea, and they could reclaim all their property, so that just moving to Lebanon and to Syria was just a temporary settlement. Obviously, they were mistaken, as we know. If you remember, also, in addition to that, the elite of Palestine's Arabs deserted the land by the thousands, selling their properties and taking their wealth to other Arab countries immediately in the weeks that followed the UN partition vote at the end of 1947. And so the mass of the Arabs who remained behind felt, I mentioned that last time, felt completely abandoned, left to their own devices, and tried to navigate. On top of that, the mandate was closing as fast as they could. They were packing, and so they also kind of blew up their own administration. And I'm not going to recap last session. You can watch that again. But I mean, looking at the broader population, the broader Arab population, they felt completely abandoned. They felt completely lost. There were no administrative support. Their leadership had literally packed up and left, having sold everything with all their money, and they were kind of left behind holding the bag. There didn't seem to be anyone coming to defend them. There were a lot of promises, but as we saw, the war didn't unfold as planned. And so you have Arab masses that feel very much in danger, feel very much that their life is at stake, or feel that they're going to fall under Jewish rule very quickly, and so they flee. And the Arab masses begin to flee a war that the Jews didn't want, because if you remember, the Jews were very content, as they were up until May 1948, to have secured the land that was assigned to the Jews by the United Nations vote in 1947. But then the war broke out, invasion happened. The Mufti and his 30,000 volunteer fighters started to also participate in the war. And the war turned to be a very gruesome, deadly, horrific war, as war always are. And as I talked about it last time, there was great panic in the Arab villages, enormous fear, great terror because of some of the massacres that were taking place. I mentioned Deir Yassin last time. And so, they saw the horror of the war. They saw they lived in fear and panic of also, the notion of the evil Jew that had been cultivated by their leadership for decades. And all of this mixed together with them being completely abandoned, both by their own leaders and by the British mandate, pushed Arab villages to be completely deserted by their own inhabitants. Sometimes days before Israeli soldiers even came close to their villages. And so, with the horror of the war, with the Arabs feeling terrorized, with the propaganda that terrorized them even more against the Jews, it ended up that, as I mentioned the numbers last session, hundreds and thousands of Palestinians, of Palestinians, I should be careful, fled to the neighboring Arab countries, including the West Bank and including Gaza. But ultimately, if you looked at the map that I shared last time, the Jews won the war. Obviously, not having won the war would have been I don't want to even think about it. But the Jews eventually gained about 15%, I think that was the number, more territory than the partition plan had assigned them. So again, I'm going to leave it as a question because I don't want to give an answer, but we can think about, based on the circumstances of the war, and again, this is a very quick recap, is it fair to say that the land was stolen if you won a war you didn't want or didn't start? Again, it is each of us to we can have that conversation, I believe, ad nauseum. All right, so what about the genocide accusations? We have also seen that, contrary to the Spanish or the Portuguese, the British empires in the South or Central or North America, who committed genocide against indigenous populations as they stole their land, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the English, as they came over to this continent, did exactly that. But that never happened with the Jews returning to the Promised Land. Never happened. In fact, the Arab population greatly expanded, both naturally and via Arab immigration to the land, to British Palestine, partly due to British and Jewish investments in the infrastructure on the land, in sanitation, in a healthcare system, a post office, a telegraph, and also partly due to the fact that with the arrival of the Jews, there were a great boom in the economy. And so the Arab population grew from roughly 400,000 in the 1880s, at the time of the first Aliyah, the first wave of immigration, of Jewish immigration, to 1.2 million at the end of the British Mandate. And again, it's a lot of immigration. It's not just natural birth. A lot of immigration, and in fact, a large segment of the Palestinian population today is maybe 2 or 3 generations in the land. Many Palestinians came from all over the Middle East in the last 2 or 3 generations, since really the 1930s, as we saw during the course. Today, the Palestinian population stands at 7.2 million. So clearly, this is the most unsuccessful genocide in human history. Absolutely the worst, where the Israelis are really not good at it, to say the least. There is also no genocide happening today in Gaza. There is war happening in Gaza. And I think most of us by now have seen the BBC, the Wall Street Journals, and other publication made publicly clear and have proven that the numbers of deaths being reported by the Hamas health ministry, which is a euphemism in itself, are completely false and wrong, and that in fact the overwhelming majority of deaths have been that of Hamas and Islamic Jihad fighters that are reported as civilian death. Not that I am denying or minimizing the horror of civilian deaths in the war. Not at all. That is, no child, no mother, no father should fall in any war. I want to be very clear. I am very only specifically addressing the false accusation of genocide. So that's the point that I'm trying to make. There's an accusation, and based on the fact that we know to date, that is also the answer. Another accusation is that of Zionism being a settler colonialist movement. Settler colonialist movement. All right, so let's go back, because now maybe thanks to this course we have more information now in our back pocket in order to engage in conversations if we are ever invited into such a thing. As we have seen and read, every single Jew who immigrated to Palestine in all pre-state 5 waves of Aliyah, of mass immigration, were refugees fleeing persecution, violence, massacres, and in the 1930s and 40s, total extermination. These were people who had nowhere else to go, especially after the 1920s and 30s, when the world altogether, including America, closed its door completely to Jewish immigration and Jewish refugees. Now, in addition to that, in the 1950s and 60s, there was nearly another million Jews fleeing the persecutions in Arab lands that became the refugees returning home. So, truly, this is not the picture of settler colonialists that have come to take over the land by force with armies, but in fact, escapees who also, contrary to colonialism as we know it, will struggle for decades to survive in the land, to rebuild a life in the land. I have explained, I think, in my course on anti-Semitism, so that's a course that I taught 2 years ago, why the Arabs, as we have seen in the earliest attempts at framing the conflict via propaganda by the Mufti of Jerusalem, if you remember already in the 1920s, are mistakenly going to accuse the Jews and Zionism to be a settler colonialist movement. And the tropes that, 100 years later are still repeated and adopted wholesale, as we see on our campuses by what seems to be the radical left in the West, not just in the US, but in Europe as well. Look, I'm going to paint this with a very wide, broad brush. So you can take my course on anti-Semitism for more details. It is on the BetAleph YouTube channel. It is on our website. It is accessible to all for free. But I try to explain in that course that the Arab world couldn't fathom being defeated by the Christian world. I think that's where we have to start. The Jews come later. But at first, the Arab world couldn't fathom being defeated by the Christian world. Why? Because the Quran and Muhammad had prophesied that Islam, just like Christianity before, would conquer the world. Again, I'm not doing it any justice. There's much more details in that, but again, broad brush strokes, right? Islam had, as part of its ideology, the notion that Islam would conquer the world. And by 1900, by the year 1900, they had done an incredible job at it. By 1900, by the year 1900, Islam had conquered the entire northern half of Africa. They had obviously conquered the entire Middle East, even beyond Turkey, encroaching into Greece at that time by the year 1900. And if you continue going east, Islam had gone all the way to Turkestan, Pakistan, Bengal, and moving even farther to the islands of Sumatra, Borneo, and Java, to name but a few. There are actually more than that. So Islam was really spreading across the globe, east and west, from Mecca. But then came the European empires, and it all greatly receded or even disintegrated. And so the Muslim prophetic project that Muslims had been charged with, it seemed at that point in history, would never be realized. It felt that they had failed to fulfill the promise of Islam. And that's huge. Like, we need to really understand that's huge. History was, it seemed, turning its back on them. And what that meant theologically was that they had failed. By failing the prophecy, they had failed God. Like, God was abandoning them because they had failed in taking the prophecy to its fulfillment. It's huge. I mean, it's so weighty in the psyche of Islam. Now, it was one thing, however, to be defeated by those formidable European empires with their ultra, at the time, modern technology and technology of warfare. That's one thing to be defeated. Like, we can say, okay, we Muslims fell behind in a technological in a technological race, and therefore we've been defeated by these great wealthy superpowers. It's another thing altogether to be defeated by the dhimmi, the dhimmi, which is the sub-citizen, the lower class citizen, right? The dhimmi that is the wandering Jew. You can be defeated by the British Empire, but you can't be defeated by the pesky dhimmi wandering Jew. That was intolerable. Because the Jew is, the reject of the world, the abandoned refuse from every land. How could that Jew come to reclaim any part of his ancestral land by taking it away from the sons of the prophet? So that was intolerable. And so they had to explain that away. And the way they explained it away was that surely that pesky Jew, that dhimmi Jew, wasn't strong enough to defeat the superior Muslims. But the Jew could only do that by hiding behind his protectors. The Jew had protectors, of course, he had patrons, and he cunningly manipulated his protectors. He pulled their strings to achieve his nefarious goals. And so the publication of the Protocols of the Elder of Zion at the beginning of the 20th century, which is a fabricated propaganda text published in 1903 by the Tsarist secret services, the secret services of the Tsar, and disseminated throughout the world in the first decades of the 20th century, including, by the way, by Gerald Ford, who made sure to have to have pages of it printed in his Dearborn newspaper that were available to all in all the car dealerships that he owned. So the protocols of the elders of Zion was vastly promulgated, and especially in Muslim countries. And it is actually to this very day. We can't underestimate the power of that very old publication now. And that popularized, if you want, the belief of an international Jewish cabal, an international Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. It's still alive and well in even in America, by the way. And the Nazis made it a required text for their school children and made sure that it was disseminated throughout Islam. And so it was such a small step, for Islam to go and claim that Jews were actually behind, first the Tsarist, because if you remember, the Ottoman Empire was at war with the Tsar, a Russian Tsar. And so the Jews, the Jews who came from Russia at that time, they were behind the Tsar. And then they were the manipulators of the British Empire when Britain came over, right? And then it was the Soviets that were their patrons, and they manipulated the Soviets, of course, to serve their aim. And then it was the French who helped. The French obviously helped them. And then, today is the America is propping up those Jews, because on their own, they couldn't do anything to Islam. And so all of these, I mean, think about it. The Tsarists, the Tsar, the Empire of the Tsar, the British Empire, the Soviet Empire, the French Empire, the American Empire, all of those are colonialist movements, settler colonialist movements. And so therefore, if the Jews are hiding behind all of those settler colonialist movements, manipulating them on their behalf, therefore they are themselves settler colonialists. That's the thread. That's the thread from the reality of hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees to kingmakers and manipulators of settler colonialist movement, one after the other, by the way, to get their will, to get their way, and therefore making those bunch of refugees into the great Satan of evil colonialists, settler colonialists. That's the thread. But even then, from a scholarly perspective, the scholars who write books about Zionism being a pure example of colonialism, even them, because they have to stick to their scholarly principles, right? From the scholarly perspective, they always have footnotes. They have footnotes, and in those footnotes, they speak of, those marginal exceptions to the definition of colonialism in order to fit Zionism in the definition. Because they're struggling with the fact that Zionism doesn't exactly fit the definition of colonialism. So they tell us, there are marginal exceptions. And those marginal exceptions don't really detract from the argument that Zionism is colonialism. And here are the exceptions that they make. Those marginal exceptions, we have to mention them there, but they're not strong enough to counter our argument. So here are some of those exceptions. One, Jews came as persecuted refugees. not a normal colonial project occurrence. So they have to note that. Second, Zionism isn't an economic project to exploit local resources, as most colonial settler colonialist movements are, right? They're almost first and foremost, an economic project that is meant to extract from the conquered land uh, all the local resources and the local wealth to redirect that to the motherland, right? But Zionism doesn't exactly work because historically, Zionists, in fact, developed the economy of the land. So they did the opposite. They didn't exploit the land, they actually helped it develop economically. So also not usually part of a colonialist project. Also, third, there is this old Jewish tradition of returning to their ancestral land for national rebuilding. You know, they've been doing this for hundreds of years. It didn't start in 1880. I mean, the Jews, you know, as we saw in the first few sessions, the Jews have always come back in some numbers in almost every generation. So, three, there is this old Jewish tradition of returning to their ancestral land for national rebuilding. And this one in particular, the Zionist project, is one that in fact created a nation with its own language, with its own culture, its own sense of history, and its own sense of self. So we can really say that no other colonialist project ever included that. So again, maybe it's just a marginal exception. And lastly, the last exception they are looking at is Jews have no mother country to go back to or to send, you know, all that extracted wealth back to, because they themselves came from 60 different countries as refugees, 60 different countries as refugees. So, you know, it's a little bit more complicated with the Jews, but other than that, it's definitely a colonialist project. Now, the danger this represents, in my sincere opinion, is that by defining Zionism as a settler colonialist program, project, is that it instills in the Arab population, and especially in the Arab Palestinian population, the belief that, as in all historical processes of decolonization, the colonizer, as we've seen through history, after applying enough political pressure and violent terror, the colonizer is ultimately convinced to leave. We've seen this in all movements of decolonization. We've seen that in one of the one that is part of my family is Algeria, for example. But it happened in all processes of decolonization. France in Vietnam, for example. Anyways, so if you apply, based on historical processes of decolonization, if you apply enough political pressure and violent terror, the colonizer is ultimately convinced to leave. So you don't really need to win a war, though you could. All you really have to do is to harass the colonizers with enough regular acts of terror for them in time to eventually pack up and leave. So ingrained is this belief that is still clearly propagated to the ignorant minds of Westerner leftists that it fails to realize that Israeli Jews then, like now, have nowhere else to go. There is no motherland to return to. That's a huge, I want to say, mistake that Arab propaganda is making by insisting on calling Israelis settler colonialists, because there's a set of expectations by using these qualifiers that in fact has no basis in reality, because Israeli Jews have nowhere else to go. They're not going to pack their bags and leave for where? Like, return where you came from. Okay. Well, we came from mostly a million of us from Arab lands. So by now, after 70 years, let's say to this day, we know actually half of the Jews in Israel, maybe a little more, come from Arab lands. So it would mean that if we were to follow the logic of the Palestinian propaganda and the affirming that that Zionists are settler colonialists, and that Jews should go back to where they came from, some 3.5 million Jews would go back to Arab lands. The majority of which actually would be Iraq, because Jews lived in Iraq for 2,500 years, since biblical times, and the first exile and the destruction of the first temple. I wonder if all of those Arab lands would welcome the Jews as part of the process of decolonization of Israel, right? There is the most famous song in Israel. The most famous song in Israel. It's like is second to the national anthem, really. It's called Ein li eretz acheret. And it literally means, I have no other land. That's second to the national anthem. Popular, it's a song that is top popular in every generation. And believe me, it's being played in Israel today. Israeli Jews are home. Israel is our homeland. Israelis and Palestinians aren't going anywhere. So the false settler colonialist narrative might help the Muslim world digest its having been defeated, but it sets up Palestinians with a distorted perspective that has kept them from attaining independence by having time and again rejected, since the British Mandate and the Peel Partition Plan, all the way to the 2008 Ehud Olmert Plan, any and every proposal for a two-state solution, or simply a political participation, political economic participation with the Jews of governing. Because as we've seen from the start of the British Mandate and to this day, the Palestinian leadership and following them, the Palestinian people and the Arab nations behind them, have refused to engage and pursue the goal. Have refused to engage in any way, economically, politically, over and over again. They have refused. And in fact, they have instead pursued the goal of a Judenrein Palestine, a Palestine free of Jews, right? That's the slogan, right? A Palestine free of Jews. They didn't seek to build themselves into a viable, independent, peaceful state, but they focused their energies instead on the destruction of Jewish settlements through the first half of the 20th century, and then of the state of Israel ever since. And it's worth noting, that the two main political entities that today represent the Palestinian people are the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, which is ruled. The Palestinian Authority is kind of a name, umbrella name, for really what is the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization of Mahmoud Abbas, who is ruling the Palestinian Authority. So the political party that is ruling non-democratically, let's say, the West Bank under the umbrella of the Palestinian Authority is the PLO of Yasser Arafat and now Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and in Gaza, the Hamas. Those are the two main political factions. Well, I don't know if you could even call them political, but the factions that are ruling over both the West Bank and Gaza. We know clearly about Hamas, but maybe we've forgotten what the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was. It was founded in 1964. It was founded in 1964 by the Arab League in Cairo and was given as its leader an Egyptian man of Palestinian descent named Yasser Arafat. And it was founded as a terrorist organization responsible for countless terror attacks, including the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre. If you're around for that, you remember that. Countless bombings in the 70s, hijacking and blowing up of planes. And even for those old enough to remember, the hijacking of the Achille Lauro Italian cruise ship as well. And I found, it's easy to find, you can just Wikipedia it, the official emblem of the PLO today. And I wanted to share that with you. So bear with me a moment so you can take a look at it. This is the emblem of the PLO today. Let me see if I can make it full screen. This is the emblem of the PLO today. And I mean, look at the map. It's the same green map that we just depicted. So it gives you a sense of what their aim was and still is, because this is the current one. This is the latest emblem, the latest logo of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as it stands today. So again, it feels like just looking at that map, that the goal hasn't changed. I mean, like I said, it really feels to me that both the Hamas and the PLO with Abbas and the West Bank are still fighting a 100-year-old war. They're still fighting it. They're still fighting it. And yet, over the years, since the 1990s, really, there have been many Israeli offers of a two-state solution between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And it started, I remember because I was there, with Yitzhak Rabin and the Oslo Accord with Yasser Arafat. But it continued because, the 1990s, things didn't go well after that. And I don't have the time to get into the detail, but we had two intifadas in Israel. But then it continued with Ehud Barak, who brought forth a peace plan in 2000, in the year 2000, at Camp David to Yasser Arafat, who was still alive then, a proposal that was in fact ultimately rebranded as the Clinton, as of Bill Clinton, the Clinton Peace Plan. And all of this is available online. You can Google it yourself. Now, what did Ehud Barak offer 24 years ago? And I'm going to give you the highlights. One, the offer made to Yasser Arafat in Camp David with Bill Clinton in 2000 was 24 years ago, was one, 95% of the West Bank, and 100% of Gaza. At the time, Gaza was still under Israeli control with Israeli settlements. 100% of Gaza, and the construction of a tunnel between the two, so there would be a continuous Palestinian state. That was the first of many proposals. Two, Barak ceded to Yasser Arafat all Arab neighborhoods of East Jerusalem to be the capital of Palestine, as well as full Palestinian sovereignty over the Temple Mount. Three, Barak guaranteed the right of return to all Palestinian refugees, including reparations, financial reparations of $30 billion. That's in 2000. That would be from an international fund. He committed as well to give Palestinians desalination plants to ensure them adequate water supply. What he asked in return, for the recognition of the Jewish East Jerusalem neighborhoods to remain under Israel's sovereignty, and an agreement by Arafat that the conflict was over, that all radicals were going to be reined in and disarmed. That was actually, that second demand was the deal breaker for Arafat. He couldn't get himself to do that. And so he walked away without even offering a counter proposal. And if you remember Dennis Ross, who was part of the Clinton government, who bore witness to the proceedings. Dennis Ross said at the time about Yasser Arafat, he said, for him, the conflict is an end to itself. And I think he was right on. As we see from the map of the PLO to this day. Now, in 2008, 8 years later, after Israel had completely pulled out of the Gaza Strip, and unfortunately Hamas had taken it over, Ehud Olmert in 2008 made a similar offer than Ehud Barak, and I will actually include that. I will include the link to his proposal with a lot more details in the materials for this session, together with the recording tomorrow. But every single offer has been rejected. Every single offer. Why? Well, I think for the same reasons that Hajj Amin, the Mufti of Jerusalem, refused to cooperate in a British-led interfaith government in the 1920s. Because that policy hasn't changed. And the policy is no participation, no negotiation, no peace, no Jewish presence in the land. Which is arguably, one might say, why the Israeli concept or notion of a land for peace, that was the mantra of Israel for the last 30 years. Land for peace. And Israel pursued this land for peace. That has not worked. And it is possible to reason that this strategy will continue to fail as long as the Palestinians hold on to this extreme position. And as Egypt, Jordan have long made peace with Israel, as Morocco, Bahrain, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, among others, and soon Saudi Arabia are moving away from this narrative and finally building ties with Israel through the Abraham Accords. The Islamic Republic of Iran is still holding on to the notion that the small Jewish island in the vast sea of Muslim lands is an affront to Islam and should be destroyed. Arming and training organizations like Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the Houthis, to continue to pursue its goals by proxy. And caught in the middle is the Palestinian Arab population, who is being lied to. This is my opinion at this point. Brainwashed to believe in false narrative that only perpetuates its misery, which of course is blamed on Israel, and whose lives are sacrificed for the Ayatollah's genocidal delusions. And so Palestinians are kept fighting the 1948 war. And we in the West believe that surely Palestinians want a future for their children. The future of peace, of security, of economic prosperity in their own independent land next to a peaceful, secure, and prosperous Jewish state. We have to believe that. But to date, what Palestinians seems to tell us is that the future they want is unwaveringly from the river to the sea. That Palestine will be Jew-free. That's really the full sentence. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be Jew-free. And they're still holding on to that delusion. And with that, and to me, because of the Abraham Accords, I'm holding on. All of us must hold on a radical, positive vision for both people in the land anyways. So I'm left to wonder, I'm looking at all of those protests on our campuses, and I'm wondering, are these protests pro-Palestinians or pro-Islamic Iran regime? Are they actually pro-Hamas? Because again, isn't calling for a Palestine free from the river to the sea really calling for a Palestine free of Jews, which is an ethnic cleansing program at best, a genocide of Jews at worst? Isn't that perpetuating a self-defeating narrative that is, I would argue, anti-Palestinian, because it keeps the Palestinian people stuck in a self-defeating, vicious cycle? It's like shouting from the lawn of, Columbia University that you will fight for the Palestinians until the last drop of their blood. You see the paradox in that? Like I said earlier, I want to believe that there is a way for, I think the Palestinian leadership, I think the Palestinian people is something different, but the Palestinian leadership to stop fighting the 1948 war, just like Saudi Arabia, just like the United Arab Emirates, just like Bahrain, just like Morocco, just like all those Arab countries that are now moving beyond that, right? That have come to, if I were to use again the mourning stages, the stages of mourning, that have come to this place of acceptance. Israel is here to stay. Israel is here to stay. And for Israel is the same. The Palestinians are there to stay, right? Can we move on to the stage of acceptance and let go of denial and anger? Let go of keep on fighting that war? Overwhelmingly, it seems that the Arab countries around Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, soon Saudi Arabia. That's hope for me. That's hope. That's hope. Anyway, I would love for, again, maybe I'm an idealist, but I would love for this shift in consciousness to happen, right? That this little island of Jews in the vast Muslim ocean really isn't a problem. Like Sharif of Mecca, Sharif Hussein, if you remember, He had said exactly that at that lunch in London in 1920. He's like, yeah, that's not a problem. You Jews can have a piece of land, right? That Arabs can choose to build a more positive relationship of cooperation with their Jewish neighbors. That's, in fact, what I'm seeing as the growing narrative. And that's the narrative that must be explored with the Palestinian people. And in fact, I believe championed by all peace loving people. So if I had a magic wand, at the end of the war in Gaza, after Israel has eliminated the Hamas threat, and if there is any hostage still alive, freed the hostages, Israel will continue to manage the security in Gaza for a short time and invite in a coalition of Arab states from the Abraham Accords plus Saudi Arabia to help build a civil society in the Palestinian territories, disarm the radicals, and orient its people toward a future that is accepting of reality as it is, accepting of reality as it is, of Israel's existence, of a future that is beneficial to both people. And then we then will be able to come back to Barak and to Olmert, to their proposals for peace, and finalize a generous peace accord between Palestine and Israel. That, if I had a magic wand, what I see the next few months bringing to us. But it doesn't help us American Jews here. I mean, it might. I want to close with that because I hope this course shed light on the fact that Israeli Jews and American Jews lived through the 20th century very, very differently. American Jews have lived in the land of liberalism. American Jews have lived in the land of prosperity, in the land of abundance and tolerance. They've mostly been unscathed by two world war, mostly been unscathed even by the Holocaust. And they never really had to fight as Jews for their survival. American Jews have never really had to fight for our survival. Israeli Jews are from generations of refugees. They lived through all the Jewish crises and devastations of the last 150 years, from the Eastern European pogroms to the Holocaust and the ethnic cleansing from Arab lands. It's a nation of Jews, but it's a nation of refugees, which had to endure and survive through really harsh lives in the Middle East while continuously facing violence under two empires. It is a nation which was born in struggle, fighting time and again for its survival through multiple wars, and still managed to birth an imperfect, for sure, but still a postmodern, liberal, pluralistic, democratic state. We can't understand Israel if we think Israeli Jews, by virtue of being Jewish, are like American Jews. They're not. We here in America, we may be ill at ease about the war in Gaza because really, as Jews, war is foreign to us. But I can assure you that there is virtually no Israeli adult alive today, man or woman, who hasn't worn the uniform of the IDF and fought in a war. Fighting for survival has been part of the Israeli experience for generations and generations. And so they live much more urgent lives than we do. Their hierarchy of needs is vastly different than ours. They built a very high-tech Western country. I mean, Tel Aviv is Miami. It's crazy. But they are also very much a Middle Eastern people who lives in the geopolitical realities of the Middle East. So bring it even closer to home, to us, left-leaning American Jews. It's been clear to me that in order to belong to the progressive movement at this point, as we actually have for decades, that the cost of membership today has become too onerous. At first, let's give some examples. At first, the price was to denounce Netanyahu's policies. And that wasn't hard at all. In fact, we continue to do so. He's giving us plenty of opportunities. But skip a few steps, then we were asked to declare Israel as an apartheid state. And that was harder, but to some of us, we could be convinced that this was the price to admission, and so we went with it. But then the bar was moved a little further again. We needed to agree that Zionism is racism. And since racism is the worst accusation one can these days really be accused of, be labeled with, we were then asked to admit our Jewish white supremacy together with our oppressor status, that we might expiate our sins. And for those of you who know the political spectrum of Jewish organizations, I don't know if you do, but for those of you who do know, kind of the same idea. But we went from AIPAC. From AIPAC, we went to J Street. And then from J Street, we went to If Not Now. And then from If Not Now to Jewish Voices for Peace. Until one day, we found ourselves as the Jewish militant co-chair of Student Justice for Palestine. And we realized that unless we are, completely on board with the project, then we're just not a good enough Jew. And it's been through a constant form of bullying that we've been pushed to give up more and more pieces of ourselves. And I suspect that, in fact, there is no end to the bullying. I suspect that more and more demands of self-denial and self-erasing will be made on us until we completely erase the Jew in us. So who is a Zionist? Who is a Zionist today? Now, if we go back to our definition, a Zionist is someone who supports the existence, viability, and security of the Jewish state, the state of Israel. Someone who supports the existence, viability, and security of the state of Israel, of a Jewish state in the Jews' ancestral home as a people indigenous to the Promised Land. Who is an anti-Zionist then? Well, to me, an anti-Zionist is someone who opposes this very definition. Someone who opposes the existence of a Jewish state of Israel, who doesn't recognize the right of Jews to have a homeland there. Some of them even deny the indigenous nature of our people to the Promised Land. But when someone says they are anti-Zionists, we first must ask what they mean, because they may intend something else. But if we're able to not reject offhand a person who comes to us and says, I'm an anti-Zionist, and say, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Then that question can invite dialogue. And in dialogue, we can invite an exchange of ideas. Not that we need to be convinced or to convince anyone, but just to air out concepts and ideas, things that we hold on to. And if that is welcome, if the exchange of ideas is welcome, then we can set a space to grow from arguing each of our perspectives. And frankly, that has been the Jewish way forever. That's the way we learn. We learn through arguing. So that's what I would say to someone who comes to us and say, I am an anti-Zionist, instead of going, What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean? I would venture to say that most people don't share the definition that we have shared as part of this course. And therefore, it's a beautiful exploration to have. All right, I will close by sharing my perspective. Not that I haven't already, but and again, it's just a perspective. It's not gospel. And very important, I always reserve the right to upgrade my perspective at any given time. So with this caveat, I would say that today, I consider myself a Zionist, according to the definition that I just shared. I consider myself a Zionist who, for example, like the overwhelming majority of Israelis, by the way, seeks to live in brotherhood with his Arab neighbors. And actually, I love that the Abraham Accords have the name Abraham, because to me, it speaks of a shared lineage, of a shared family of origin. And I think this is a powerful basis for building friendship and relationship. So I am this brand of Zionist. But with that, I would say that I know who I am. I know my history and that of my people. I, as an Israeli Jew, with that groundedness, with that knowing of myself, I simply, with no animosity in my heart, I simply just also refuse to justify my existence. I refuse to justify my existence or explain why I have the right to exist or the right to have a state of my own. I am the grandson of Holocaust survivors and ethnically cleansed Jews from Arab lands. I am a Zionist Jew who has seen what has happened to his own people in the 2,000 years it didn't have a place in the world to call home, right? And like every people in history, my history also includes great light and great shadow. In every step of the way, there could have probably been many different ways for the history of Zionism and then after that of Israel to unfold. And maybe not. Maybe that was the only way it could have unfolded. I don't know. Just like there could have been maybe 1,000 different ways to fight this war in Gaza. But maybe not. Maybe that's the only way it could have been fought. I don't know. And I will be the first one to criticize Israel when it fails to uphold the vision it was founded on, the vision it has upheld for itself. Why? Because I love Israel. And I will be the first one. I love Israel. That's why I would criticize Israel. Just like we criticize America because we love America. I will also be the first one to support the Palestinian people toward achieving independence and self-determination in their own state. Why? Because I love Israel. I will also be the first one to stand for Israel when it is demonized and falsely attacked. To me, it is unfathomable, an unfathomable miracle that Am Israel Chai, that the Jewish people is alive at all, that it has survived for 3,000 years, and that it still exists. And so I will, trust me. I mean, I'm a rabbi anyway, so I don't really have a choice. But I will never be a closeted Jew. I owe no explanation for my being here to anyone. I will never erase myself or disavow parts of who I am to fit into a movement that clearly at this point is rejecting me. A movement that to me seems to have betrayed itself. A movement that was about peace and inclusion and that's turned into one of hatred and exclusion. One that is about coerced uniformity of thought and belief, hiding beneath the lie of diversity and inclusion. If I were to make my own rabbinic analogy, Maybe some of you will giggle with me, but it feels like this radical progressive movement, right? It started as a reform movement, and now it's an orthodox movement. But in truth, here's where I sit today. I feel that I don't need to fight it. I don't need to fight it. I need to stand for who I am, but I don't need to fight it. I don't seek conflict, and I know no hatred for anyone. And I seek to include everyone's perspective, especially that of those I disagree with. And yet I stand. I stand firmly. I stand simply and humbly as someone who knows my separate conditioned self to be who I am. And I will continue to speak clearly as possible, with as clear a voice as possible, against hatred, against anti Semitism, for true diversity, true inclusion, for tolerance and respect, and for all the values that I cherish. And maybe that's why I wanted this course to take place. Am Yisrael Chai. May the people of Israel continue to live on. And may we reach for peace with all our Arab neighbors beyond the war in Gaza. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Amen. Thank you all for taking this course. I appreciate your presence and your support, both in being here with me or in your lovely, wonderful donation to this process. Henry Ford, no Gerald Ford. Sorry, Linda. Thank you. Henry Ford. I don't know why I said, so many Fords. Yeah, Thea is right. If there is no place for Jews to go back to, and there is no place for Jews to go back to, then the only result is eradication by default. Yes. So I think I talked about Zvulun. I talked about the post-war plan. I really hope that comes to be. And I really hope that comes to be because after the Hamas is taken out, is defeated, you can't bring the Palestinian Authority to take over Gaza, because all you're going to do if you do that is bring more bloodshed between Palestinians themselves. Understand that when Hamas took power in the Gaza Strip in 2006, 2007, from the Palestinian Authority, they massacred them. They massacred all the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. They threw them from the tallest buildings in the Gaza Strip. So there is no real brotherhood between those two entities, the PLO or the Hamas. So my sense is that he really would take from other Arab countries. Clearly, it can be Israel. It can be Israel. It can't be. It can be the Palestinian Authority. It has, in my view, it has to be a coalition of other Arab countries who seek to normalize relationships with Israel, and mostly in their own ranks seek to eradicate those Islamic radicals. All of those countries that I have named, I've worked tirelessly to get rid of their own Islamic factions that are a plague in their own country. So let me say this, they're not unhappy that Israel is going after the Hamas. Because again, there is the greater war really is between Iran and everyone else. Israel is not really at war with Hamas. Israel is at war with Iran. And all of those Arab countries are concerned with Iran's extremism. And so, you know, in a kind of twisted way of history, how history is twisted, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and therefore there is now, um, you know, a rapprochement, a connection with Israel from those Arab lands because they're fighting a shared enemy in Iran and its proxies. So I really think that if we can manage to get delegations from Egypt and Jordan, Morocco, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia to step in, and God knows that they have enough money to rebuild and create a viable Arab society, and then we'll go back to the peace plan. We'll unite both, with that tunnel. We'll unite both Gaza and the West Bank in one state, and we'll get to have an independent Palestinian state, demilitarized, of course. That's going to be a request from Israel. But I really, fingers crossed. I'm no prophet, but I see this as possible. I see this as a real possibility. But again, it has to come from, getting especially the Palestinian leadership to this place of acceptance. And that's why I was thinking about it as a mourning process. Like they're still in mourning of what could have been, of what they could have had. And that is doing them a lot of damage. And it's causing a lot of violence and a lot of death. Anyways, I could go on. And we could talk about this forever. And everybody would have a slightly different view on this. And it's okay. And it's okay. So I hope you have a lot of tools now in your bag and that you will continue to explore. I was mentioning earlier before we started the broadcast, Noah Tishby's book, Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth. It's a fast read, and it's got a lot of good stuff in there. Yeah, she's an easy person to read. A good book, a really good book. All right, friends, we're going to close with a shalom chant and with gratitude for your presence and your support. I invite you to close your eyes. And take a breath for shalom. 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 Thank you.
Modani. Thank you.
תודה רבה.
Thank you very much.
Bevakasha.
Truly mind and heart bending. Thank you.
Thank
Really.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Olivier.
You're welcome.
Safe travel tomorrow.
Thank you.
Hello to Amalia.
I will.
Thank you, Rabbi. Great class.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Incredible class. Thank you very much.